My wife cheated with my friend and had his child, whom I raised believing he was mine. When I filed for divorce, my sister insisted I should pay child support. For years, I lived in what I thought was a picture-perfect world. I had a beautiful wife, Jessica, and an amazing little boy who I thought was the center of my universe. Our life together was simple but fulfilling. Weekends spent at the park, movie nights snuggled on the couch, and family dinners where we laughed about silly things like my son's obsession with dinosaurs. In my mind, we were unbreakable. But one ordinary evening, everything unraveled. Jessica had asked me to order groceries while she was putting our son to bed. I grabbed her laptop since it was already open on the kitchen counter. That's when I noticed it. Her email account was logged in, and a subject line practically screamed at me. "We need to talk about Mark." I hesitated. Was it work-related? A friend? But something in my gut twisted, urging me to click. And I did. The email thread was like stepping into quicksand. The more I read, the harder it was to breathe. Jessica was writing to Mark, my best friend since college, begging him for help. Not just financial help, but emotional support. Her words stuck in my mind like thorns. "You're his father. I can't keep this secret forever. Please, Mark. He deserves to know the truth." Father. The word echoed in my head, sharp and cold. At first, I thought I'd misunderstood. Surely, this couldn't mean what I thought it did. But as I scrolled through months of messages, the reality hit me like a freight train. Jessica and Mark had an affair. My son, no. The boy I'd thought was my son, wasn't mine. He was Mark's. It didn't end there. Mark's replies were callous and dismissive, each one twisting the knife deeper. He flat out refused to acknowledge the child, brushing Jessica off with lines like, "I'm not cut out for fatherhood. You're better off without me in the picture." He made it clear he wanted nothing to do with her or the boy. I sat there in the dim light of the kitchen, my hands trembling. All the memories I had of holding my son for the first time, of hearing his laugh, of him calling me dad, felt tainted, like they belonged to someone else. When Jessica came downstairs, I was still staring at the screen, my stomach a churning mix of rage and heartbreak. She froze in the doorway, her expression shifting from confusion to dread as she saw the open emails. "Explain," I demanded, my voice low and sharp. Her face went pale. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, her hands shaking. I thought you'd never find out," she stammered. Those words knocked the wind out of me. She didn't even apologize at first. She didn't defend herself. She simply admitted she thought I was stupid enough to never catch on. My voice cracked when I asked, "How long have you been lying to me?" Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. 3 years, she whispered. "Since before he was born." I slammed the laptop shut and stood, towering over her. "You lied to me for 3 years? You let me believe he was my son, and let me bond with him while you knew the truth." My voice was rising, the pain spilling out like a dam breaking. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said weakly, her tears flowing now. "I didn't mean for it to happen. Mark and it was a mistake. But I was scared, okay? I didn't want to lose you. I didn't want to raise him alone." Her words were like gasoline on a fire. "You didn't want to lose me? You didn't think you might lose me when you slept with my best friend?" She flinched, but I didn't care. I grabbed my phone, pulling up the same emails and shoving it in her face. "And this? Begging him to play dad? While I was here, what? Paying the bills, raising your child, and being your backup plan?" Jessica sobbed, but I felt no sympathy. I couldn't feel anything but anger and betrayal. My voice dropped, cold and final. "I want a divorce." For the first time that night, she panicked. "No, please. We can fix this. I made a mistake, but you're his dad in every way that matters. He doesn't even know Mark. He doesn't have to. We can move past this." I shook my head. "I love that boy because I thought he was mine. You took that from me. You took everything from me." Jessica collapsed onto the couch, her sobs filling the room. But I didn't stay to listen. I grabbed my keys and left, needing space to think, to process. I drove aimlessly for hours, my mind replaying everything over and over like a broken record. By the time I pulled into a motel parking lot, I felt like a stranger in my own life. The world I thought I knew was gone, replaced by this twisted reality where the two people I trusted most had betrayed me in the worst way imaginable. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jessica's face when I confronted her, heard the word dad in my son's voice, and felt the crushing weight of knowing it had all been a lie. The next morning, as the sun rose over the motel, I made a promise to myself. No matter how hard this got, I would get through it. But first, I had to figure out how to pick up the pieces. The days after that night were a blur of emotions. Anger, sorrow, disbelief. I couldn't wrap my head around how deeply I'd been betrayed. Jessica had shattered my trust, but what made it unbearable was the innocence of the boy caught in the middle. My son, except he wasn't really mine, was he? That thought haunted me, twisting every sweet memory into something bitter and hollow. Jessica spent the first few days oscillating between begging for forgiveness and trying to rationalize what she'd done. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said more than once. Mark and I were drunk. It was a mistake, but her words only fueled my anger. A mistake? I snapped. A mistake is spilling a drink. What you did? That was calculated. You let me live a lie for 3 years. She'd cry, claim she didn't want to lose me, and then shift to pleading. You're the only dad he knows. He loves you. That last part made me feel like I'd been punched in the chest. Because I did love him, still do if I'm honest. But every time he looked up at me with those big, trusting eyes, I saw Mark. I saw Jessica's betrayal. It wasn't the boy's fault. He didn't choose any of this, and I hated myself for even letting the thought cross my mind. I tried to keep things normal for his sake, but it was like walking through quicksand. When he called me Dad, the word was a knife twisting in the wound. I'd smile, play along, but inside, I was screaming. When I couldn't take it anymore, I confided in my sister, Emily. I needed someone to tell me I wasn't crazy for feeling so betrayed, for wanting out of this mess. But when I told her the truth, her reaction caught me off guard. Emily didn't explode with outrage like I thought she would. Instead, she sat there quietly, her face tight. When I finished, she shrugged and said, "Well, what's done is done. You're his dad in every way that matters." Her words stung. What do you mean? What's done is done. Jessica cheated on me. Mark is his biological father. I've been lied to for years. Emily shifted uncomfortably. I get that, but he's just a kid. And Jessica's still your wife. Maybe this is something you can work through. For him, the way she said it was so detached, like she was talking about someone else's life. I stared at her, trying to figure out what was going on. This wasn't the Emily I knew. She'd always been fiercely protective of me, the first to stand up for me when things got tough. But now, it was like she was defending Jessica. You're taking her side? I asked, incredulous. I'm not taking anyone's side, she replied quickly. Too quickly. I think you should think about what's best for the boy. He doesn't deserve to lose the only dad he's ever known. Something about her tone felt off. Defensive. Almost panicked. I couldn't figure out why she was acting so strange, but it left me with an uneasy feeling. I dropped it for the moment, not wanting to start another fight. But her words stuck with me. Back at home, the tension between Jessica and me was unbearable. I avoided her as much as I could, throwing myself into work just to have an excuse to stay out late. When I was home, I spent most of my time with the boy. He didn't understand what was going on, and I wanted to keep it that way. For now. But every time Jessica tried to talk to me, the same cycle began. Apologies, excuses, and pleas. She wouldn't stop pushing the narrative that we could fix this. We can go to therapy, she said one night, her voice desperate. We can rebuild. Please, for him. You lost me the second you decided to lie, I told her coldly. There's no going back. That night, I slept in the guest room. Or at least, I tried to sleep. My mind kept drifting to Emily. Her reaction, her words, it didn't sit right with me. Something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling that she was hiding something. If only I knew how deep the rabbit hole went. Filing for divorce wasn't just a decision. It was a lifeline. It felt like dragging myself out of quicksand, gasping for air after being suffocated by years of betrayal. My lawyer, a no-nonsense woman named Linda, assured me that the process would be relatively straightforward. She can't demand child support for a child who isn't biologically yours, Linda said firmly. Don't let her intimidate you. Jessica, of course, had other plans. The moment she received the divorce papers, she exploded. Her first reaction was to accuse me of abandoning her and our son. He's your son, she screamed during one of our many arguments. You've been his father for 3 years. What kind of man just walks away from his family? Her audacity made my blood boil. You think I'm the bad guy? I shot back. You lied to me for years. You cheated on me with my best friend and let me raise his kid. You don't get to play the victim here. But Jessica wasn't interested in accountability. Instead, she doubled down. She began demanding alimony and, unbelievably, child support. She claimed she deserved compensation for the life I was taking away from her. When Linda got wind of it, she laughed bitterly. She doesn't have a leg to stand on, she said, but that didn't stop Jessica from trying to drag me through the mud. What made it worse, what really blindsided me, was Emily. My own sister started taking Jessica's side. At first, it was subtle, little comments like, "You're being harsh," or "Think about the boy." But it quickly escalated. Emily started calling me daily, pleading with me to do the right thing. "You're all he's ever known," she said during one particularly heated call. "How could you turn your back on him?" On Jessica? Her words cut deep because they echoed the conflict already brewing inside me. I loved that kid. For 3 years, I'd been his dad. But every time I thought about staying in his life, I felt the weight of Jessica's lies crushing me all over again. How could I keep pretending? When Emily's calls didn't work, she started showing up unannounced. One evening, she came to my apartment, her face tight with frustration. "You need to step up," she said as soon as I opened the door. "Jessica made a mistake, but you're punishing a little boy who doesn't deserve it. Step up." I snapped. "I've been stepping up for 3 years, Emily. I stepped up when it wasn't even my responsibility. Don't stand there and lecture me about what I owe her after everything she's done." She didn't back down. "This isn't about Jessica. This is about him. He's your son in every way that matters." "No, he's not," I said, my voice trembling. "He's Mark's son." Jessica made sure of that the day she decided to lie to me. "I didn't get a choice in this, Emily. She stole that from me." Her face crumpled, but it wasn't guilt. It was something else. Panic, maybe? She left without another word. But the encounter left me shaken. Why was she so invested? Why was she fighting harder than Jessica? It only got worse. Emily started involving our parents, spinning the narrative that I was abandoning my family out of spite. Mom and Dad, oblivious to the full story, called me one evening, their voices tinged with disappointment. "We raised you better than this," Mom said. "Whatever happened, that little boy loves you. Are you really going to let him suffer because of adult mistakes?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Mom, do you even know what Jessica did?" I asked, my voice rising. "She cheated on me with my best friend. She lied about the paternity of her kid for years. And now she wants me to pay her for it. Do you seriously think that's okay?" But Emily's poison had already done its damage. "Jessica's not perfect," Dad said gruffly, "but you're still the only father that boy has. He didn't ask for this?" The conversation left me furious. It was bad enough that Jessica was trying to milk me dry, but now Emily was turning my own parents against me. None of it made sense. Why was Emily so desperate to defend Jessica? The answer came a week later. I was home, nursing a glass of whiskey after another grueling meeting with Linda, when Emily showed up again. This time, she was different. Tense. Nervous. She refused to meet my eyes as she stood in my doorway. "I need to talk to you," she said quietly. I let her in, wary of what new guilt trip she'd unleash. But instead of lecturing me, she sat on the edge of my couch, her hands wringing in her lap. "There's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is it now, Emily?" I asked, exasperated. She looked up at me, her eyes glassy with unshed tears. "Jessica knows something about me," she admitted. "Something I can't let get out." The air shifted, heavy with tension. "What are you talking about?" She hesitated, then finally broke. "A few years ago, I made a mistake. I had an affair." Her voice cracked on the last word, and my stomach dropped. "What?" She nodded miserably. "Daniel doesn't know. He thinks our daughter is his, but she's not. Jessica found out, and she's been threatening to tell him unless I convince you to pay her what she wants." Her confession hit me like a freight train. I stared at her, stunned into silence. All the pieces started clicking into place. Her defensiveness, her constant pressure, the way she seemed more panicked than Jessica herself. "You're kidding me," I finally said, my voice low and disbelieving. "You've been trying to guilt me into paying her off because she's blackmailing you?" Tears streamed down her face, but I felt no sympathy. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "I couldn't let Daniel find out." I stood, pacing the room as anger boiled in my chest. "So, let me get this straight. Jessica blows up my life, and instead of supporting me, you decide to pile on because you're too scared to face your own mess?" "I'm sorry," she said weakly. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Emily. You've been lying to me this whole time, just like her. How am I supposed to trust anyone after this?" She didn't have an answer. That night, I told her to leave and not come back. I wasn't sure which betrayal hurt worse, Jessica's or Emily's. All I knew was that I was done being manipulated. Emily showed up uninvited again, cornering me as I got out of my car one evening. I had just come back from another exhausting meeting with Linda, and I wasn't in the mood for one of her lectures. Her expression was tight with determination, her arms crossed as she stood between me and my front door. "We need to talk," she said, her voice sharp. "I don't have time for this, Emily," I said, brushing past her. She followed me up the driveway, her footsteps quick and forceful. "You're being ridiculous," she snapped. "Family takes care of family. You can't just abandon that little boy like he's nothing. What kind of person does that make you?" I spun around, the frustration boiling over. "Why do you care so much?" I demanded, my voice louder than I intended. "Why are you bending over backward to defend Jessica? This isn't your fight." Her face twisted, and for a moment, I thought she was going to slap me. But then something unexpected happened. She crumbled. Her arms fell to her sides, and she let out a shaky breath, tears filling her eyes. "You want to know why I care?" she choked out. "Fine, I'll tell you." Her voice broke on the last word, and I stood frozen, the anger in my chest replaced by a creeping sense of dread. "Emily," I started, but she cut me off. "I had an affair," she said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "Years ago, before Lily was born." I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her right. "What?" She looked down, unable to meet my gaze. "It was a mistake. I thought it was over, and I moved on." But her voice cracked, and she covered her face with her hands. "Lily isn't Daniel's." The world tilted, and I grabbed the railing of the porch to steady myself. "You're joking," I said, though I already knew she wasn't. She shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Jessica found out somehow. I don't know how, but she did. And now she's threatening to tell Daniel unless I get you to pay her what she wants." I couldn't breathe. My own sister, my closest ally, had been living a lie just like Jessica. And now, because of her, I was being dragged even deeper into this nightmare. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice low with disbelief. "You mean to tell me you've been on Jessica's side this whole time because she's blackmailing you?" Emily nodded miserably. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "If Daniel finds out, it'll destroy my family." I stared at her, my mind racing. All those phone calls, the guilt trips, the way she tried to turn our parents against me. It all made sense now. She wasn't defending Jessica because she cared about the boy. She was doing it to save her own skin. "You let her manipulate you," I said, my voice rising. "You let her use you to manipulate me. Do you have any idea how screwed up that is, Emily?" "I know," she cried. "I know I messed up, okay? But I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," I shot back. "And you chose to betray me." She grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. "Please," she begged. "Don't tell Daniel. He loves Lily. He doesn't need to know. This doesn't have to come out." I yanked my arm free, stepping back as anger and disbelief churned in my chest. "You think I can just forget this? You think I'm going to keep your secret after everything you've done?" Her face crumpled, and she sank onto the porch steps, sobbing. For a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it was quickly overshadowed by the weight of her betrayal. "I can't trust you anymore, Emily," I said quietly. "You're just as bad as Jessica." Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face full of desperation. "It's not the same." "Yes, it is," I cut her off. "You both lied. You both played me. And now you expect me to clean up your mess? I'm done. Do you hear me? I'm done." She didn't try to stop me as I walked inside and slammed the door behind me. But as I sat in the dark silence of my living room, the weight of what I'd just learned pressed down on me. Jessica wasn't just trying to destroy my life. She was dragging Emily's down with her. And now I had a choice to make: protect my sister's secret or blow everything up. Jessica didn't waste any time flipping the narrative. Within days of me filing for divorce, I started hearing whispers, friends we'd known for years calling to check in or sending cryptic messages about how it's important to work through hard times. It didn't take long to figure out why. Jessica was telling anyone who would listen that I'd blindsided her and abandoned our family. She conveniently left out the part where she cheated on me with my best friend or lied to me for 3 years about the paternity of her child. In her version of events, I was a cruel, heartless husband who couldn't handle the responsibility of being a father. I wanted to defend myself, to set the record straight, but Linda warned me against it. "It's tempting to engage," she said during one of our meetings, "but anything you say can and will be used against you. Let her dig her own hole." Mark, predictably, was nowhere to be found. The man who had been like a brother to me ghosted as soon as the truth came out. No apologies, no explanations, nothing. He left Jessica to handle the fallout alone, and I wasn't sure if that made me angrier or just sad. How had I been so blind to the kind of person he was? Meanwhile, Jessica was relentless. She began dragging out every step of the divorce proceedings, using every trick in the book to stall and frustrate me. Her latest tactic was challenging every document we filed, claiming errors or misrepresentations that didn't exist. "She's trying to wear you down," Linda said, her tone matter-of-fact. "It's a classic move. But don't worry, we've got this." Despite her reassurances, the constant back and forth was exhausting. Every meeting with Jessica and her lawyer felt like walking into a minefield. She'd sit there with crocodile tears, painting herself as the victim, while her lawyer made ludicrous demands for child support and alimony. "She's playing the long game," Linda told me after one particularly infuriating session. "She's banking on you giving up and agreeing to her terms just to make it stop." But I wasn't about to give in, not after everything she'd put me through. Through all of this, Emily stayed silent. I hadn't spoken to her since she'd confessed her affair, and she hadn't reached out either. Part of me wondered if she felt guilty, but another part suspected she was just hiding, hoping Jessica wouldn't follow through on her blackmail threats. The lack of contact didn't make her betrayal any easier to swallow. Every time I thought about her standing in my driveway, pleading with me to protect her secret, it felt like another layer of trust had been stripped away. Jessica had destroyed my marriage, but Emily had destroyed my faith in family. One night, I sat in my apartment, scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of me and Jessica smiling at a party, Mark standing beside me with a beer in hand. Photos of me holding their boy, on his first birthday. My face lit up with pride. I felt like an idiot. How had I been so blind? How had I missed all the signs? But as much as I wanted to blame myself, I knew this wasn't on me. They had made their choices, and now I was paying the price. Jessica's next move came a week later. I received a text from a mutual friend, Sarah, asking if I wanted to meet for coffee. When I showed up, she cut straight to the point. "Jessica's been telling everyone that you cheated on her." My jaw clenched. "Are you serious?" Sarah nodded, her face apologetic. "She's saying that's why you're filing for divorce. That you've been seeing someone else and wanted an excuse to leave her and the boy." The audacity was staggering. "You believe her?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "Of course not," Sarah said quickly. "But not everyone knows the full story, and she's very convincing." I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down on me. Jessica wasn't just trying to take me down legally. She was trying to destroy my reputation. That night, I sat in my apartment, staring at the ceiling. I'd already lost so much: my marriage, my faith in Mark, my trust in Emily. And now, Jessica was coming for what little I had left. The worst part was knowing I couldn't fight back, not without risking everything in court. All I could do was endure it and hope the truth would come out in the end. But as the days passed and the rumors grew louder, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jessica wasn't just trying to hurt me. She was trying to ruin me completely. And for the first time, I started to wonder if I'd make it out of this mess with anything left at all. It was only a matter of time before the truth about Emily reached Daniel. I had wrestled with whether or not to tell him, but ultimately, I didn't have to. Someone else did it for me. Whether it was Jessica, or one of her manipulative tactics, or someone who simply connected the dots, I'll never know. What I do know is that one evening, my phone lit up with a call from Daniel, and I could hear the devastation in his voice before he even spoke. "Is it true?" he asked, his words trembling. I froze, knowing exactly what he meant, but wishing I didn't. For a moment, I thought about lying, about deflecting, but I couldn't do it. He deserved the truth. "I'm sorry, man," I said quietly. "I just found out myself." The silence that followed was heavy. "How long have you known?" he finally asked. "Not long," I admitted. "A week, maybe 2. I didn't know how to tell you." Daniel let out a hollow laugh, the kind that comes when there's nothing left to feel but pain. "Guess I was the last to know." "Huh," he said bitterly. "How do you live with someone for years and not see it? How do you raise a kid thinking she's yours when—" His voice broke, and he didn't finish the sentence. I wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that none of us had seen it coming. But I knew words wouldn't help. He ended the call abruptly, and I didn't hear from him again until the following week, when I found out he'd moved out. Emily, predictably, was livid. She called me the next day, her voice sharp with anger. "You couldn't keep your mouth shut, could you?" she spat. I didn't tell him. I said, my patience already wearing thin. Someone else did. But even if I had, he deserved to know. "Emily, you can't just expect me to lie for you. You don't understand," she shouted. "You've ruined everything. He's gone, and now Lily, she's going to lose her dad. Maybe you should have thought about that before you cheated on him." I shot back, my voice cold. She hung up on me, and I was left with the hollow realization that our relationship was beyond repair. Emily wasn't angry because her marriage was falling apart. She was angry because she'd lost control of the narrative. And now, like Jessica, she wanted someone to blame. Meanwhile, Jessica had taken her manipulation to a new level. She began telling our son, Mark's son, that I didn't love him anymore. It started small, little comments. She probably thought I wouldn't hear about how Daddy doesn't want to be here or Daddy doesn't care like he used to. Then, one evening, when I picked him up for a scheduled visit, he looked up at me with those big, innocent eyes and asked, "Do you still love me, Daddies?" I nearly broke down right there. I scooped him up in my arms, holding him close. "Of course I love you," I said, my voice shaking. "Don't you ever think otherwise?" He nodded, but I could see the doubt lingering in his expression, planted there by Jessica's lies. It shattered me. I wanted to protect him from all of this, but I didn't know how. No matter what I said or did, Jessica had a way of twisting the truth to suit her agenda. At night, I lay awake, haunted by the mess my life had become. Daniel was gone. Emily was furious. And Jessica was doing everything she could to poison my relationship with the boy I'd once called my son. I felt like I was losing everyone I cared about, one by one, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. The worst part was the guilt. As much as I tried to tell myself this wasn't my fault, that Jessica and Emily were the architects of their own destruction, a small voice in the back of my mind kept whispering that I could have done more, should have done more. But how do you fix something that was broken from the start? How do you rebuild trust when the very foundation has been ripped out from under you? I didn't have answers, and I wasn't sure I ever would. All I knew was that the lies and betrayals had created a ripple effect, and the damage was spreading further and further. And at the center of it all was a little boy who just wanted to be loved. The day of the final hearing arrived like a storm cloud I'd been watching approach for months. I'd prepared as best as I could, but Jessica's unpredictability kept me on edge. Linda, ever the calm presence, assured me we were ready. "Whatever she throws at us, we've got the facts on our side," she said. Jessica, of course, didn't stick to the facts. Midway through the hearing, her lawyer presented a series of text messages supposedly sent by me. They painted a picture of a cold, manipulative, emotionally abusive husband who had belittled Jessica and alienated her from her family and friends. I felt my jaw tighten as Linda stood to refute the evidence. "Your Honor," she said firmly, "these messages are fabricated. My client has never written these, and we can prove it." She handed over phone records and expert analysis, showing the timestamps didn't match my activity. Jessica didn't flinch, but I saw the faintest smirk tug at the corner of her mouth. She knew it was a lie, and she didn't care. This wasn't about winning the argument. It was about planting doubt. Though Linda dismantled the claim piece by piece, the damage was already done. By the time the hearing ended, I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, questioning, judging. Jessica's lie had poisoned the air, and I wondered how much of the damage could ever be undone. The judge's ruling came down later that day. No child support, minimal alimony, just enough to help Jessica get back on her feet. On paper, it was a win, but when I looked over at Jessica, she didn't seem like someone who had lost. She walked out of the courtroom with her head high, smirking as if she still held all the cards. I didn't understand it at first. We'd fought tooth and nail, and she had come out with barely a sliver of what she demanded. So, why did it feel like she had won? I got my answer a few days later. A friend of ours, Sarah, texted me out of the blue. "Hey," the message read, "I thought you should see this." Attached was a screenshot of a GoFundMe page Jessica had created. The title read, "Abandoned by a Cruel Husband, a Mother's Fight for Survival." The description was a masterclass in manipulation. She claimed I had emotionally tormented her for years, left her penniless, and refused to support our son. She painted herself as the hero of the story, a single mother trying to rebuild her life after being discarded by a heartless man. The kicker? She'd raised over $10,000. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours, a strange numbness settling over me. I wasn't even angry. I'd gone through so much in the past few months that this just felt inevitable. Of course Jessica would find a way to turn her lies into profit. Of course people would believe her sob story. I closed the text and set my phone down, staring at the ceiling of my apartment. What was the point of fighting anymore? Even with the court ruling in my favor, Jessica had managed to tarnish my reputation, alienate me from friends, and drive a wedge between me and the boy I'd once called my son. For the first time in months, I allowed myself to cry, not out of anger or frustration, but out of sheer exhaustion. I was tired of the lies, the manipulations, the constant fight to hold on to scraps of my dignity. I wanted it all to end, but even as the tears came, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me that it wasn't over. Jessica might have won this round, but I still had my freedom, my truth, and the chance to rebuild. It didn't feel like much in that moment, but it was something. And for now, that had to be enough. Daniel and I met up for beers one Friday night at a dive bar halfway between his new apartment and mine. It wasn't a planned thing. We'd exchanged a few awkward texts after his move, and somehow, we both ended up needing the distraction that night. He was already at a booth when I arrived, nursing a whiskey neat. He looked rough, dark circles under his eyes, his once neatly trimmed beard now unruly. I realized I probably didn't look much better. Rough week? I asked as I slid into the seat across from him. He let out a dry laugh. Is there any other kind lately? The waitress brought me a beer, and we sat in silence for a while, the low hum of the bar filling the gaps. Finally, Daniel broke the ice. So, Emily, he said, swirling his drink. I tensed but nodded. Yeah. He exhaled slowly. You know what the weirdest part is? I don't even hate her. I probably should, but I don't. All I keep thinking about is Lily. His voice cracked slightly when he said her name. She's my kid, even if she isn't. I can't just walk away from her. I stared at him, feeling a mix of admiration and pity. He had every right to cut ties completely, but he was choosing to stay for Lily's sake. I wasn't sure I had that kind of strength. She's lucky to have you, I said. He laughed bitterly. Yeah, well, I'm not sure she'll feel that way when she's older and finds out the truth. But for now, I'm staying. Emily screwed up, but Lily didn't ask for any of this. We spent the rest of the night talking about the messes we were trying to navigate. Betrayal, trust, and the way our lives have been turned upside down. Daniel shared how he was trying to co-parent with Emily, even though their relationship was now little more than a fragile truce. I told her we're done, but I'll be civil for Lily's sake, he said. That's as far as I'll go. I nodded, understanding the boundaries he'd set. For me, it wasn't that simple. Jessica's manipulations had poisoned my relationship with the boy, and I wasn't sure how to salvage it, or if I even could. Do you think it ever gets easier? I asked him after my third beer. He shook his head slowly. No idea. But I know I can't give up. Not yet. His words stuck with me. As much as I admired his resolve, I wasn't sure I had the energy to keep fighting. The weight of everything, Jessica's lies, Emily's betrayal, the court battles, hung over me like a storm cloud I couldn't escape. Meanwhile, Emily had started trying to reach out again. She called a few times, left long, rambling voicemails that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Her texts were filled with apologies and desperate attempts to explain herself. But I couldn't do it. Family or not, some things couldn't be undone. Emily had made her choices, and those choices had destroyed not only her marriage but also our bond as siblings. Every time I thought about her siding with Jessica, pressuring me to pay child support to protect her own secret, it felt like a fresh wound. One evening, she showed up at my apartment. I saw her through the peephole and ignored her knock. She stood there for a few minutes before finally leaving, her shoulders slumped. I felt a pang of guilt, but reminded myself that forgiveness wasn't owed. It had to be earned. As Daniel and I continued meeting up, I started to find a strange sense of solace in our shared misery. We didn't have solutions, but it felt good not to be alone in it. Some nights, we'd sit in silence, letting the weight of everything settle around us. Other times, we'd joke about the absurdity of it all, laughing until the laughter turned into something closer to tears. Even with that small bit of comfort, I couldn't shake the feeling that my life was stuck in limbo. The people I'd trusted most had betrayed me, and while I was trying to move forward, the past kept dragging me back. Daniel seemed to have a clearer path. He was fighting for Lily, no matter what. I envied his certainty, even as I doubted my own ability to do the same. For now, all I could do was take it one day at a time and hope that, eventually, the storm would pass. I was in the middle of cleaning up dinner when the knock came. It was late, too late for casual visits. I wiped my hands on a towel and opened the door, my heart sinking the moment I saw Jessica standing there. She held the boy's hand, his small fingers wrapped tightly around hers. I need a break, she said, her voice edged with desperation. Please, just take him for the weekend. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. Whether it was exhaustion or an act, I couldn't tell. The boy looked up at me with a tentative smile, one that tugged at every unresolved emotion inside me. I hesitated. Every fiber of my being wanted to shut the door and walk away, to remind her that this wasn't my responsibility anymore. But the boy's innocent gaze softened me. He didn't deserve any of this. Fine, I said finally. Come inside while I grab his things. Jessica stepped in, glancing around like she expected me to explode. Thank you, she murmured. I ignored her, heading to the hall closet to grab some of the spare clothes and toys he'd left behind. When I came back, Jessica was crouched down, giving the boy a quick hug. Be good for Daddy, she whispered. The word hit me like a gut punch. She stood up and left without another word, leaving us standing in awkward silence. The weekend was complicated. I took him to the park the next day, hoping the fresh air and open space would distract me from the constant churn of my thoughts. He ran ahead, laughing and chasing squirrels, his joy so pure it made my chest ache. We stopped for ice cream on the way home, then played video games until his eyes started drooping. Tucking him in that night, I felt a strange, bittersweet calm. For a moment, it felt like old times, like we were a family again. But then the truth crept back in, cold and unforgiving. This wasn't old times. This wasn't my son. No matter how much I cared for him, no matter how much he loved me, the bond we'd built was based on a lie. I spent most of the next day quietly wrestling with those thoughts, trying to figure out where I stood. When he asked me to read him a bedtime story that night, I almost said no, the weight of everything pressing down on me. But then he handed me the book with a hopeful smile, and I couldn't refuse. As I turned the pages, his head resting on my shoulder, I wondered if cutting ties would hurt him more than staying. The question lingered long after he'd fallen asleep, his small hand clutching the hem of my shirt. Jessica showed up Sunday evening, looking just as frazzled as when she dropped him off. She barely said a word to him before turning to me, her expression shifting from tired to smug. You've been good to him, she said casually. You know, a little financial support would go a long way for his future. It took a moment for her words to register. My jaw tightened. Are you seriously asking me for money? She shrugged, leaning casually against the doorframe. You care about him, don't you? I mean, you just had him for the whole weekend. Clearly, you're still playing the part of a father. Why not help out a little? Her audacity left me momentarily speechless. Finally, I stepped back and shut the door in her face, the lock clicking loudly in the silence. As I stood there, staring at the closed door, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was just done. Done with her manipulations, her games, her constant attempts to guilt and control me. That weekend had shown me two things. First, I still cared about the boy, even if he wasn't mine. And second, I couldn't keep living in this in-between space, holding on to a role that wasn't really mine to claim. It wasn't fair to him, and it wasn't fair to me. As much as it hurt, I knew I needed to figure out how to let go, for both our sakes. Life feels quieter now, though not in the peaceful way I'd hoped for. It's the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, when the winds die down, but you're left standing in the wreckage, unsure of where to start picking up the pieces. I moved into a smaller apartment a few weeks ago. It's nothing fancy, a one-bedroom on the edge of town, but it's mine. There's something liberating about having a space that isn't tied to anyone else. No echoes of Jessica's laughter in the hallways, no memories of bedtime stories with the boy. Just me and the blank walls waiting for a new chapter to start. Therapy has been complicated. Some days, it feels like progress, like I'm peeling back the layers of anger and betrayal to find something resembling closure. Other days, it feels like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into the void. My therapist keeps telling me healing isn't linear, and I try to believe her. Daniel and I still meet up every now and then. He's trying to navigate the minefield of co-parenting with Emily, balancing his love for Lily with the betrayal he's still trying to process. I'm staying for her, he told me the other night, his voice heavy with exhaustion. I just hope it's the right decision. I didn't have the heart to tell him I wasn't sure I'd make the same choice. Maybe that makes me selfish, but after everything I've been through, I've learned one thing. Sometimes walking away is the only way to survive. Emily hasn't given up trying to reach me. She sent letters, emails, even showed up at my apartment once, but I couldn't bring myself to open the door. I hear about her through our parents now and then, snippets of her life that only deepen the divide between us. She's still fighting for her marriage, though from what I've heard, Daniel's heart isn't in it. Jessica, on the other hand, is a ghost. I've seen her once or twice around town, always with the boy in tow. She keeps her distance, and so do I. Whatever life she's building now, it's not my concern anymore. The boy, he's the one thing I still wrestle with. I think about him more than I'd like to admit, wondering if he misses me, if he's confused about why I'm not around. I don't blame him for any of this. How could I? But I've had to accept that staying in his life would do more harm than good. He deserves stability, and I can't give that to him. Some nights, I lay awake thinking about the life I thought I had, the family I thought I'd built. It feels like a lifetime ago, like a dream that ended too soon. But then I remind myself that it wasn't real. It was a carefully constructed lie, and the only way forward is to build something new, something honest. For the first time in years, I'm focusing on myself. It feels strange, almost selfish, but it's necessary. I don't know what the future holds. None of us do. Daniel, Emily, Jessica, they're all fighting their own battles, and I can't control how their stories end. All I know is I'm done letting them dictate mine. The road ahead is uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it's mine to walk. Whether it leads to peace, happiness, or something else entirely, I'll figure it out one step at a time. And for now, that's enough.